the hum of conversation and the gentle clinking of crystal glasses filled the grand ballroom of the luxury cruise ship Majestic Horizon. The air carried the scent of expensive cologne, fresh roses, and aged bourbon. This was a world of elegance, where men in tailored suits discussed business empires, and women in shimmering gowns adorned themselves like trophies at a high-stakes auction. Among them was Emma Carter, draped in a sapphire blue silk dress that hugged her figure with the kind of perfection that only money could buy. Yet, behind her poised smile, there was something else, something hidden beneath the surface, like a whisper in a hurricane. Beside her stood Ethan Reynolds, her husband of 8 years. Tall, handsome, and exuding the effortless confidence of a self-made millionaire, Ethan was the kind of man who commanded a room simply by walking into it. His salt and pepper hair was impeccably styled, his posture was perfect, and the gold Rolex on his wrist gleamed under the chandelier lights. To the world, he was a respected real estate mogul, a man whose sharp mind and ruthless ambition had built an empire. But to Emma, he was something else entirely. Ethan had once been charming, the kind of man who made her feel seen, valued. When they first met at an art gallery in New York, he had spoken about her paintings with such admiration that she had believed, for a time, that he truly understood her. That was before the little corrections began, her wardrobe, her words, her friends. Before she stopped painting because it was a distraction from her duties as his wife. Before she learned to measure her worth in his approval, to shrink herself to fit into the mold he had designed for her. Now, on this luxurious cruise, a week-long networking event disguised as a vacation, Emma played her role to perfection. She smiled when introduced, nodded at the right moments, and kept her responses as light as champagne bubbles. The investors surrounding Ethan, mostly men in their 60s, spoke of market trends and international deals, their voices heavy with confidence. Emma was merely an accessory, the silent, well-dressed wife standing at his side. But tonight, something shifted. "Emma, darling, come here," Ethan's voice cut through the air. It was smooth, almost sweet, but there was no warmth in it. It was a command, wrapped in the illusion of affection. She stepped forward, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor, and felt Ethan's firm grip on her waist as he pulled her into the conversation. "This is my wife, Emma," he introduced with a practiced smile. "A talented artist, though I've yet to convince her to trade in her paintbrushes for something more profitable." The men chuckled politely. Emma swallowed the retort that burned on her tongue. One of the investors, a man with silver hair and a deep southern drawl, turned to her. "So, Mrs. Reynolds, what do you think about our global expansion into South America?" For a moment, she hesitated. She wasn't supposed to have an opinion on these matters. But something about the way he asked, genuine curiosity rather than condescension, made her answer before she could stop herself. "I think it has potential, especially if you incorporate sustainable infrastructure. The demand for green energy is rising in those markets." Silence. A flicker of surprise crossed the investor's face. Then, just as quickly, Ethan let out a light, dismissive laugh, squeezing her waist in warning. "Oh, my dear, she's learning," he said, shaking his head with a grin. "Art is really her forte, but she likes to dabble in business talk." The men chuckled again, this time at her expense. Heat rose to Emma's cheeks. She lowered her gaze, forcing another smile, though her fingers tightened around the stem of her champagne flute. The night continued, but Emma felt suffocated. The grandeur of the ship, the glistening chandeliers, the sound of jazz humming in the background, it all felt like a carefully constructed illusion. She was a prisoner in a golden cage. Hours later, as the party dwindled, she slipped away to the upper deck, where the cool night air finally gave her room to breathe. The ocean stretched endlessly before her, dark and vast, as if calling her towards something beyond the horizon. She didn't hear Ethan approach until it was too late. "You embarrassed me tonight," he said, his voice low, dangerous. Emma turned to face him. "I just answered a question." "Exactly," he hissed. And then the slap came, sharp and sudden, the sting spreading across her cheek like wildfire. Emma's breath caught in her throat. She raised a hand to her face, feeling the warmth of her own skin where his palm had struck. Ethan leaned in, his voice a whisper against her ear. "You are nothing without me." For years, she had believed that. But tonight, as she stared out at the endless ocean, something inside her cracked. Not with fear. With resolve. Emma sat in front of the vanity mirror in their presidential suite, her cheeks still tingling from Ethan's slap. The overhead light cast a harsh glow on her reflection, illuminating the faint redness on her skin. She had spent years perfecting the art of hiding bruises, both the visible ones and the ones that lingered beneath the surface. But tonight, something felt different. The words Ethan had spat at her, "You are nothing without me," echoed in her mind. He had been saying versions of that for years, but this time, it didn't take root. This time, she felt something else rising within her. Not fear. Not shame. Something sharper. Anger. She took a deep breath and turned away from the mirror. Ethan had stormed off after the confrontation, most likely to drink with his business partners or charm investors into another shady deal. He wouldn't be back for hours. And that gave her time. Emma moved carefully, listening for any sign of movement outside the suite before stepping toward Ethan's private office, a small space connected to the bedroom, where he spent late nights making deals he never spoke about. It was the only place she had never dared to enter without permission. Until now. Her pulse quickened as she approached his mahogany desk. She knew Ethan kept important documents here. He was meticulous, almost obsessive, about keeping things in order. The top drawer was locked, but Emma had seen him open it dozens of times before. His methodical nature worked against him. He always used the same combination for everything. She typed the code into the small digital lock, 0321, his birthday. The drawer clicked open. Inside, neatly arranged in manila folders, was a collection of financial records, contracts, and business agreements. Emma flipped through them, her hands trembling slightly. At first, everything appeared legitimate: real estate transactions, investment portfolios. But then, toward the back of the drawer, she found a black folder labeled Kraken Holdings. Her stomach twisted. She knew Ethan had businesses overseas, but she had never heard of this one. As she scanned the documents, the truth unraveled before her in horrifying detail. There were records of offshore bank accounts, transactions disguised as investments but linked to shell companies in the Cayman Islands and Luxembourg. The deeper she dug, the worse it got: contracts tied to arms deals, drug smuggling routes, and even human trafficking networks under the guise of logistics. Ethan wasn't just a businessman. He was a criminal. Emma covered her mouth with her hand, her breath coming in short, uneven gasps. How had she been so blind? How had she convinced herself that his power and wealth were simply the result of clever investments? She fumbled for her phone, her fingers shaking as she began taking photos of every page. Bank statements, signatures, confidential emails, she documented everything. These weren't just business dealings. They were evidence. And if Ethan ever found out she had them, he wouldn't just slap her. He would destroy her. She needed help. Emma thought carefully. She couldn't go to the authorities, not yet. Ethan had powerful connections. Reporting this the wrong way could get her killed. Then she remembered Logan Miller, an investigator that her old friend, Rachel, had mentioned years ago. He specialized in uncovering financial crimes involving powerful men like Ethan. If anyone could help, it was him. Her fingers hovered over her phone as she composed a message. "Logan, this is Emma Carter. I need your help. It's urgent." She hesitated before hitting send. Would he even remember her? Would he believe her? But she had no choice. Moments later, her phone buzzed. "Logan, Emma? What's going on? Are you safe?" A wave of relief flooded through her, but before she could respond, a noise from the hallway made her freeze. The sound of footsteps, heavy, deliberate. "Ethan." Emma quickly closed the drawer, shoving everything back into place before slipping out of the office. She barely had time to compose herself before the door swung open. Ethan stepped inside, his eyes narrowing the moment he saw her. "What are you doing?" His voice was smooth, but there was a dangerous edge beneath it. Emma forced a smile, holding up a makeup brush she had grabbed from the vanity. "Just freshening up before bed." He studied her for a long moment before stepping closer, running a hand through her hair. "Good girl," he murmured. "No more foolishness like earlier, hm?" She nodded, her heart pounding. As soon as he turned away, she exhaled slowly. She had the evidence. She had reached out for help. And now, she had to play the role a little longer. But not for much longer. Because for the first time in years, Emma had a plan. The next morning, Emma sat at the edge of the grand breakfast terrace, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee. The majestic horizon was gliding through the turquoise waters of the Caribbean, its polished decks glistening under the golden sun. Around her, well-dressed guests laughed over freshly squeezed orange juice and perfectly plated eggs Benedict, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath the surface of her life. Across the table sat Noah Brooks, the charming art curator she had met on board. With his disheveled brown hair and easy smile, he had seemed like a beacon of hope, a man who saw her as more than Ethan's wife. He had praised her artwork, spoken about its raw emotion, and made her feel, for the first time in years, like she still had an identity beyond Ethan's shadow. But now, sitting across from him, Emma felt something gnawing at her instincts. The night before, after she had secretly gathered evidence against Ethan, she had sent a brief message to Logan Miller, the investigator she was hoping could help. Hours later, Logan had responded, not just with concern, but with a warning. "Be careful of Noah Brooks. I've been digging into his past. He's connected to something bigger. Don't trust him blindly." Emma hadn't wanted to believe it. Noah had been kind, supportive, an unexpected ally. But as she watched him now, the way he stirred his coffee absent-mindedly, his fingers drumming against the porcelain cup, she realized that something about him was off. Had she let her desperation blind her? "You seem quiet this morning," Noah said, tilting his head. His voice was smooth, casual. "Late night?" Emma forced a small smile. "Just tired. Too much champagne at the gala, I suppose." He chuckled, but his eyes studied her carefully. "You disappeared after the event. I looked for you." Her stomach clenched. Why had he been looking for her? "Needed some air," she lied, taking a slow sip of her coffee. Noah nodded but didn't press further. Still, something in his gaze unsettled her. Later that afternoon, Emma found herself wandering the upper deck, her thoughts tangled in a web of doubt. The ocean stretched endlessly around her, vast and untamed, a stark contrast to the world Ethan had built for her, a world of polished surfaces and silent obedience. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through the encrypted messages Logan had sent. Noah is more than just an art curator. He has ties to a private organization, one that operates in the shadows. The same organization Ethan is entangled with. The council. Emma's fingers tightened around the phone. If Noah was working for the council, what did that mean for her? Had he been watching her? Feeding information back to Ethan? Was his encouragement about her art genuine, or was it all part of a carefully crafted deception? She needed to test him. That evening, during yet another extravagant cocktail party, Emma maneuvered her way through the crowd, her heart pounding as she spotted Olivia Bennett, the wife of one of Ethan's business partners. Olivia was elegant and poised, with the kind of grace that masked years of suffering. Emma had suspected for a while that Olivia was just like her, trapped, controlled. If there was anyone on this ship who would understand, it was her. Slipping past groups of laughing socialites, Emma reached Olivia's side. "I need to talk to you," she whispered, her voice urgent but quiet. Olivia glanced at her, a flicker of recognition in her eyes. She had always been perceptive. "Not here," Olivia murmured, setting her champagne flute down. "Follow me." They stepped out onto one of the ship's private balconies, the sound of the ocean muffling the party behind them. Emma didn't waste time. "I know what Ethan is involved in. And I know your husband is part of it too." Olivia stiffened but didn't deny it. Instead, she exhaled, her shoulders sagging slightly. "You have proof?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Emma nodded. "Enough to take them down." A long silence stretched between them before Olivia spoke again. "Then you're in danger." "I know." Emma hesitated. "But I think I've been trusting the wrong person." "Noah Brooks, have you heard anything about him?" Olivia's expression darkened. "He's more dangerous than you realize." Emma's stomach dropped. "He works directly with the council," Olivia continued. "He's not just an art curator, he's an operative. He's sent to watch people, to guide them in the direction the council wants. If he's taken an interest in you, it's not because he admires your art." Emma's breath hitched. "Then he knows. About the evidence. About everything." Olivia nodded grimly. "And if he knows, Ethan will too, if he doesn't already." The realization sent a cold shiver down Emma's spine. She had been careful, but not careful enough. If Noah had been working against her this whole time, then she was already running out of time. She needed a new plan. "Olivia," she said, her voice steady despite the panic tightening her chest, "I need your help." Olivia met her gaze, something hard and determined in her eyes. "Then we do this together." For the first time in years, Emma wasn't alone. But she also knew, if they didn't act fast, neither of them would make it off this ship alive. Emma and Olivia sat in the dimly lit corner of the Majestic Horizon's lower deck lounge, far from the watchful eyes of Ethan's security team and the ever-present surveillance of the council. The scent of aged whiskey and cigar smoke lingered in the air as the two women leaned in close, their voices barely above a whisper. "I have the evidence," Emma began, sliding a small USB drive across the table. "Financial records, offshore accounts, everything." Olivia picked up the drive, her manicured fingers tightening around it. "This is enough to take him down?" Emma nodded. "It's more than enough." She hesitated before adding, "But we need to be smart. If we move too soon, Ethan will bury this before anyone even sees it. And if the council gets wind of it," she didn't finish the sentence. They both knew what that meant. Olivia exhaled, glancing around the lounge before speaking again. "I know someone who can help." Emma's brow furrowed. Who? Sophie Mitchell. Olivia's voice was steady, but there was an urgency in her eyes. She's married to Daniel Mitchell, one of Ethan's biggest investors. She's been gathering her own dirt on him for years. But unlike us, she's got connections. Emma considered this. She had met Sophie a few times, always poised, always perfectly composed. But behind the elegant exterior, there had been something else. A quiet sadness. A kind of understanding that only another woman in captivity could recognize. If we loop her in, we can use her resources to expose Ethan, Olivia continued. She has contacts in the media, people who won't just report this, they'll broadcast it worldwide. Emma's heart pounded. You trust her? Olivia nodded. I trust that she wants out, just like us. Emma leaned back in her chair, staring down at the USB drive. This was it, the moment where hope met action. The plan was simple, but dangerous. Step 1. Get the evidence to the right people. Sophie would arrange for the financial documents to be leaked to several major news outlets simultaneously. No single journalist, no single publication, this had to be too big for Ethan to silence. Step 2. Expose Ethan publicly. The cruise was hosting an exclusive gala the next evening, a night where Ethan would be at the height of his power, surrounded by investors, politicians, and high-ranking executives. Olivia and Emma would use the ship's event projection system to broadcast Ethan's crimes live to everyone in the room. The second his corruption was exposed, it would be impossible to cover up. Step 3. Ensure their safety. Once the evidence was made public, Ethan would be backed into a corner. He wouldn't go down quietly. Emma and Olivia needed an escape route, a way to get off the ship before Ethan, or worse, the council, could retaliate. The problem is, Emma said, her voice lowering, Ethan always has men watching. If he suspects anything, he'll shut this down before it happens. Olivia smirked, pulling out her phone. That's where Logan comes in. Emma blinked. Logan? He's already on board, Olivia revealed. He booked a last-minute spot under a different name. He's been keeping an eye on things since you contacted him. Emma felt a rush of relief. She hadn't realized Logan had already infiltrated the ship. So he can help us get out? Not just that, Olivia said. He can make sure Ethan doesn't. Emma's pulse quickened. It was one thing to expose Ethan, it was another to ensure he faced justice. Do you think the council knows yet? She asked. I don't know, Olivia admitted. But I do know one thing, if they do, we won't see them coming. A chill ran down Emma's spine. The council operated in the shadows. If they suspected she was a threat, they wouldn't send warnings. They'd eliminate her. We have to do this tomorrow, Emma said, her voice firm. No hesitations. No second guessing. We go all in. Olivia extended her hand across the table. Then let's end this. Emma grasped it tightly. Tomorrow night, at the gala, Ethan Reynolds would finally fall. The majestic Horizon's grand ballroom gleamed under the glow of crystal chandeliers, the air thick with the scent of aged bourbon, fresh roses, and power. Tonight was the highlight of the cruise, a lavish gala attended by some of the most influential figures in business and politics. Ethan stood at the center, effortlessly charming his investors, his polished exterior intact. Emma, dressed in an elegant yet understated black gown, moved through the crowd with precision. She felt the weight of the USB drive in her clutch, her heart pounding with anticipation. Across the room, Olivia exchanged a brief nod with her. It was time. Near the stage, Sophie Mitchell, now fully part of their plan, discreetly inserted the drive into the galley's media projection system. The ship's massive LED screens, initially displaying a slideshow of Ethan's achievements, flickered once, twice, then abruptly changed. For a moment, the ballroom remained oblivious, laughter and clinking glasses filling the space. Then, as the new images sharpened into focus, a hushed silence rippled through the crowd. Bank statements, wire transfers, shell companies. The elegant guests stiffened, confusion spreading as the financial records scrolled across the screens. Offshore accounts traced back to arms deals, drug smuggling, and human trafficking operations. Ethan's signature was everywhere, tying him directly to the crimes. A murmur grew, a low hum of disbelief turning into a wave of alarm. Journalists, tipped off by Sophie, raised their cameras, capturing every detail. Some guests whispered in shock. Others stepped back from Ethan as if he were a contagious disease. Then, Ethan realized. His face darkened as he turned sharply toward Emma, rage replacing his usual polished calm. He strode toward her, his fists clenched, his voice a controlled snarl. "What the hell have you done?" Emma held her ground. For the first time, she wasn't afraid. "I showed them the truth." Her voice was steady, loud enough for everyone to hear. Ethan let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "You think this will stop me?" He turned to the crowd, his voice booming. "This is nonsense. Fabricated. A pathetic attempt to slander me." But nobody believed him. Olivia stepped forward. "Then explain these documents, Ethan," she said coldly, gesturing toward the screens. "Explain why you've been laundering money through fake charities. Why you've been buying influence with blood money." Before he could respond, a commotion erupted near the ballroom entrance. Logan Miller had arrived, with federal agents. A voice boomed over the microphone. "Ethan Reynolds, you are under arrest for financial fraud, conspiracy, and international trafficking." For the first time in his life, Ethan looked powerless. Security officers moved in, but in a final act of desperation, Ethan lunged toward Emma, his face twisted with fury. But she stepped back. And for the first time, he fell. To the floor. To disgrace. To justice. As the agents handcuffed him, Emma let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. It was over. The moment Ethan was handcuffed, the room erupted into chaos. Guests murmured in shock, journalists pushed forward, and security scrambled to control the situation. Emma felt her heart pounding as she stepped back, her instincts screaming at her that this wasn't over yet. She was right. Ethan might have been restrained, but his influence ran deeper than the iron shackles around his wrists. His bodyguards, well-trained and loyal to a fault, surged forward to block the federal agents. One of them, a towering man in a dark suit, reached for his earpiece and muttered something. Emma's stomach twisted. The council. They wouldn't let Ethan fall without a fight. "We have to go," Logan's voice was suddenly in her ear, firm and urgent. He had appeared at her side in the confusion, gripping her arm to pull her toward the ballroom's side exit. "Now." Emma hesitated, glancing at Olivia. "I'll handle things here," Olivia said, pressing the USB with the original documents into Logan's hand. "You get her out." Emma squeezed Olivia's hand once before allowing Logan to pull her through the ballroom's rear corridor. They moved fast, weaving through the ship's labyrinth of polished hallways and marble staircases. The elegant surroundings felt like a cruel contrast to the sheer panic flooding her veins. She had spent years trapped in this world. Now, she was running from it. The ship's security had locked down the main exits, but Logan had planned for that. "We're heading to the crew deck." "There's a service launch we can take," he said, his voice even despite the situation. But just as they rounded a corner, a sharp voice cut through the air. "That's far enough." Emma's breath caught as she turned. Noah. He stood in their path, looking completely at ease, as if he wasn't blocking their only way to freedom. His suit was crisp, his expression unreadable. But his eyes, his cold, calculating eyes, held no trace of the man who had once praised her paintings. She had been right not to trust him. "You're making a mistake, Emma," Noah said, taking a slow step forward. Behind him, 2 other men in dark suits approached, clearly working for the council. "This is bigger than Ethan. You know that." Logan shifted slightly, positioning himself between Emma and Noah. "She's leaving," Logan said, his voice steady. Noah let out a quiet chuckle. "You really think we'd let her go? She knows too much." His gaze flicked back to Emma, softer now, as if he was trying to reason with her. "Come with me. You'll be protected." Emma clenched her jaw. She had spent years under the illusion of protection. She wasn't falling for it again. "No," she said simply. Noah sighed, disappointed. Then, he reached inside his jacket. Logan reacted instantly. A single punch, clean, fast, and practiced, sent Noah staggering back. Before his men could react, Logan yanked Emma forward, sprinting toward the service deck exit. They ran. Past hallways. Down metal staircases. Through heavy doors that led to the crew area, a stark contrast to the luxury of the ship's upper floors. The lifeboats were already locked down for security reasons, but Logan had planned for something better. A small motorboat bobbed against the ship's lower deck, secured by ropes. It was meant for emergency transport, but tonight, it would be their escape. Emma hesitated only for a second, then she jumped. She landed hard, gripping the side of the boat as Logan unfastened the ropes and launched them into the open water. The cold night air bit at her skin, salty spray stinging her face. The majestic horizon loomed behind them, glowing against the dark sea, its once perfect facade cracking apart. For the first time in years, she was free. Back on the ship, Ethan was fighting with everything he had left. Even in handcuffs, he thrashed against the federal agents, his polished composure long gone. His face, once a mask of charm and control, was now twisted in fury. "You can't do this," he bellowed. "I own this ship. I own everything." But the world had already seen the truth. The evidence was out. The journalists were recording his every move. The council wouldn't save him now. As he was dragged toward the helicopter pad, his final departure not as a king, but as a prisoner, he caught sight of Olivia standing at the balcony, watching him with cold satisfaction. She lifted a champagne glass in his direction. A silent farewell. The last thing Ethan Reynolds saw before being airlifted into federal custody was everything he had built crashing down around him. Hours later, miles from the ship, Emma finally allowed herself to breathe. She and Logan sat in the small motorboat, the city lights in the distance growing closer. The weight on her chest felt lighter, though the reality of what had happened still settled into her bones. "You did it," Logan said quietly. Emma turned to face him. "We did it." She wasn't just Ethan's wife anymore. She wasn't his victim. She was Emma Carter. And she had one. The headlines spread across the world like wildfire. Ethan Reynolds arrested on luxury cruise, billionaire faces life behind bars. Shocking scandal, corrupt real estate tycoon exposed in front of elite investors. Inside the fall of a financial empire, wife's secret investigation brings down a criminal. Emma Carter sat at the small cafe table, the newspaper folded neatly beside her untouched cup of coffee. The aroma of fresh pastries drifted through the air, blending with the distant hum of city life. The sun was warm against her skin, and for the first time in years, she felt the weight of the world lifted off her shoulders. It had been 6 months since that night on the majestic horizon. 6 months since Ethan had been dragged away in handcuffs, his empire crumbling beneath him. The case against him was airtight: fraud, money laundering, illegal trafficking, all laid bare for the world to see. His powerful connections, the ones that had once protected him, had vanished overnight. Nobody wanted to be associated with a sinking ship. He had tried to fight back, of course. His legal team had thrown everything they had into discrediting the evidence, spinning a narrative of betrayal, painting Emma as a vindictive wife. But the truth was too strong. The documents, the bank records, the testimonies from former associates, they were undeniable. By the time the trial started, Ethan's fate had already been sealed. And now? He sat in a federal prison, serving a 30-year sentence, with no chance of parole. Emma should have felt triumphant. But what she felt was something simpler. Relief. She had left the city behind. No more towering skyscrapers, no more high-stakes galas, no more forced smiles at Ethan's side. Now, she lived in a quiet coastal town in Maine, where the salty ocean air reminded her of the freedom she had once dreamed about. She had bought a small cottage overlooking the water, with a wraparound porch and a studio loft where she painted every day. For the first time in a decade, she picked up her brushes without fear. Her first collection, paintings filled with hidden stories of resilience, pain, and survival, had been showcased in a New York gallery just last month. It had sold out within a week. Critics called it raw, haunting, and breathtaking. Emma simply called it healing. The cafe door chimed, and Emma glanced up. Logan Miller walked in, his worn leather jacket slung over one shoulder, his familiar smirk softening when his eyes met hers. "You're early," she teased as he sat across from her. "You're late," he countered, picking up her newspaper and scanning the latest updates on Ethan's case. "You still keeping tabs on him?" Emma asked. Logan shrugged. "Old habits." She sipped her coffee, watching as he folded the newspaper back up. "You don't have to keep protecting me, you know." He raised an eyebrow. "Who said I was?" Emma laughed. A real, unburdened laugh. They had spent months untangling the aftermath of Ethan's empire, testifying, securing her safety, ensuring the council stayed far away. Through it all, Logan had been there, steady and reliable. Now, as she sat across from him in this quiet cafe, she realized something. For the first time in years, she wasn't looking over her shoulder. For the first time, she wasn't afraid. She was free. Truly free. And for the first time, she was finally looking toward the future.